Hi, I'm Professor Leah Rapanner. As a sociologist, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Like, do pretty people get paid more, or are women better multitaskers? This is MissPerceived.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to MissPerceived. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the mental load. Now, if you've been listening to me for a while, you know many things. 1, I am the expert in the mental load. 2, I got a bajillion dollars to study the mental load. 3, I have a book coming out on the mental load. I am your mental load go-to guru. But what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about something different, and that's the mental load of dads. Now, if you're new to this or you're just still like, what is this mental load thing? Because everyone's throwing the word around and we don't really have a clear definition. Let me help you out from the research. The mental load, according to me, Liz Dean and Brennan Churchill, the mental load is emotional thinking work. It's emotional thinking work you do to keep your work, your life, your family running. So it's not a to-do list. That's a piece of it, but it's the to-do list with an emotionality. It's anything you do where you're like thinking about what you have to do or what needs to be done or how to operate in the world or whether you're going to have a wonderful Christmas or holiday season or not. Or as I'm going to talk to you about today, whether you're a good parent, that's a type of a mental load. And what I'm going to tell you is that the mental load is this emotional work. The reason why it's a load, why it's so heavy is because it is emotional. So when I say to you, what's your mental load like? Instantly, you probably feel this feeling of stress, strain, overwhelm, maybe a little bit of excitement, but there's an emotionality to it. And this is where we often get the mental load wrong because we think about the mental load as just this thinking work. It's not the thinking work. It's emotional thinking work. And that's what makes it so heavy. Now, we usually think about the mental load to mothers, and in part, that's a legacy effect of the research, but also the fact that mothers do carry a heavier mental load. But today, I'm going to do a little switcheroo on you. I'm going to talk to you about the mental load of dads. And in particular, I'm going to talk to you about a recent research article that we just published on the mental load of dads. Now, if you're a modern dad, you are thinking about your life in a different way. You know, you are committed to your work, but you're also committed to your family. You're thinking about how do I give my children not only financial support, but my emotional support? Not how do I be there? How do I show up and be my best self at work? But also how do I show up on the sports field or the soccer field or the ballet recital or the music recital and make sure that my child feels loved? This is a new style of parenting, and I'm going to talk to you now about what the research is showing. You are so lucky because we just published an article in the Journal of Family Studies, and it's about the cognitive labor of being a good dad. And this is with me, Sophie Squires, Kate Danger, and Casey Schiebling. And what we're interested in is understanding one piece of dad's mental load. Now, again, remember when I said to you at the start that we now think of the mental load as maybe like list making or, you know, keeping track of what's in the fridge. My book coming out in April is going to give you a total redefinition of it. It's going to give you 8 different types. And that's because the mental load is quite diverse. The mental load to family life is different. I'm going to talk to you about one type of mental load that's been identified in the research previously that's going to show up in my book again. And it's called metaparenting. I'm calling it metacare, but it's metaparenting. Now, if you're already like, wait, your eyes have glazed over, you've become too academic, don't panic. This idea of metaparenting is whether you have a mental load thought about whether you're doing it right. Are you being a good parent? Are the ways in which you're showing up in the world aligned with your values and your goals? Are you doing parenting the way you want to? And if you think about how much your mental load is going to like, fuck, am I doing a good job at this? You start to see that as one piece of the mental load. And so in this research article, we're interested in how dads are using that metaparenting mental load. And I'm going to talk to you about one of this concept. Now it's an empirical article. So we interviewed, you know, we've done hundreds of interviews, and this is drawing from the interviews of dads in the US and in Australia. I'll let you know that the things that they described in both countries were pretty much the same. The mental load was more or less the same. Yes, of course, the context and the contours are different because Australia is a different country to the US, but really the ways in which the dads in our sample were talking about the mental load, it didn't vary across these two countries. And I'm talking to you about how they describe their mental load around this one type of mental load. And one of the things we start to build out is that you have what we're calling in this article, mental load logics. And a mental load logic is like, imagine it's like this filter that you're running your mental load through before you decide what you're going to do, before you decide if you're going to do something. And you can imagine that if you're trying to think about, are my actions going to match whether I am a good dad in the way in which I define good dad, you could see why you will do some thinking work, some emotional thinking work. Think about it like a filter or a sieve where you have to second guess or think through your actions before you do them. And there's a reason why that is happening. Now, if you're like, okay, I'm with you. There's a reason why that's happening for dads in particular, and I'll talk to you why. But mothers do this too. I'm not saying this is something that only dads do. But the reason why dads are doing this, and it's a particularly strong drain on their mental load, is because across our articles, they kept talking about how they want to do fathering differently. They want to be a different dad. Now, there's research talking about how, this is not mine, but research talking about how actually the ways in which worlds have changed for dads has happened quite quickly. If you think about women and the march towards gender equality, women's rights in voting, women's rights in, ability to divorce, women's rights in the labor market, this has happened over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so it's kind of a gradual change. But there's an argument that for men and for fathers, that masculinity and what it means to be a good dad changed quickly. Like it almost like changed generationally. Like we almost like went to sleep and then everyone's like, yeah, not that, but now this. And so that's a quick change. And there's research showing that men want to be, the norms are changing. That yes, of course, breadwinning still remains a major factor in what we define as a good father. And again, these are social norms, not my values, not my expectations, but we have a social norm that men should be breadwinners. But there's also this shift towards this idea that men and fathers need to be fully engaged. They need to be fully engaged dads, and in multiple ways. And our research in these interviews showed here's how they want to be fully engaged. They want to be actively engaged in their kids' lives. That what that means is they want to be there and they want to be nurturing. They want time with their kids. They don't want to be a dad that just sits on the couch. They want to be a dad that's engaged, that is present, that spends time, that is nurturing. They also want to be emotionally engaged with their children. They don't want their children to have their own emotional lives, but the fathers want to be a part of that. They want to be emotionally engaged with their kids. And they also want it to be generative. What we mean by that is they want to think through how to do this. It's iterative. It's not fixed. It's not like there is one way I do this and this is the way I do that. It's actually reflexive. It's thinking about, how do I want to show up in this world? How do I want to be a good dad to this kid? How do I want to show that I love and care for them? How do I want to prepare them for the future of work? How do I want to make sure that they get the right education, the right skills, the right abilities? How do I want to make sure that my child is prepared, but also loved? And this, you might be thinking as a mother, is work that you've been doing forever, but this is work that is potentially new to fathers. And the reason I'm saying that is this was kind of the second finding that came through our research article, that, okay, dads have this new social norm about what it is to be a good dad. And what it means to be a good dad is not only to be employed, but also to be engaged with their kids, emotionally engaged, actively engaged, including nurturance, and thinking through how to be good dads. The thing is that imagine this is when we call it, when I call it the metaparenting, imagine this is the idea, the mental logic of this is how I want to be a good dad. It's like the benchmark against which men in their brains, fathers in their brains, are comparing their actions to their activities. And here's where it gets tricky. The reason is because fathers are looking for their role models to show them how to do this new form of fathering. The problem is that these role models don't necessarily exist, in part because, as I told you before, the way we expect dads to show up in the world has changed quite quickly. Dads want to show up in different ways to their own fathers. And so when we heard very, very consistently throughout these interviews in both countries was that fathers were trying to think about whether they were being successful in being these fully engaged dads. And they were doing that by comparing how they were interacting with their children compared to their own fathers. They were using their own fathers as the baseline. What this meant was they had two kind of mental load logics that they were employing. Some dads talked about their dads as the anti-models. These were the dads that they absolutely did not want to be. They did not want to do anything like the way their father did it. They wanted to be exactly the opposite. They would describe that their fathers, when they had an emotional response or a problem as a child, that their fathers would come in and say things like, toughen up. We don't feel emotion, suck it up, keep going. And this kind of masculinity or this expectation or this engagement, they did not want to do. They were trying to do, in fact, the exact opposite of that. So those fathers served as the anti-model for these fathers. Some dads were just like, not that dad. I want to do everything different. The other mental load logic they did when they did this comparison back up to their fathers was like, my dad was good, but not good enough. He did some things well, but I can improve. And this was largely about how do I engage more deeply with my family? How do I support my wife? How do I show up in more emotional ways? How do I make sure, they would say things like, my dad was pretty good and he engaged with me and, we would hang out, but he wasn't really in my emotional world, or he didn't really show up for me in these ways. And I want to do something different. Now, the reason why this is important is there's research showing that, it depends on who we compare ourselves to when we make comparisons about whether we're doing a good job. If we compare ourselves to people who are within our gender or across generations, we make different evaluations about whether we are succeeding. The interesting part for these dads, right, is that what this does for them is it provides kind of this benchmark to go like, am I doing a good job in this because I'm doing better than my dad? And usually that, that they might come to the solution of like, yeah, I am. I'm more engaged. And they would talk about like, my kids come to me when there's a problem and we brainstorm it. We try to figure out a solution. I would have never gone to my dad about this. My dad would have never been interested in this. Some say like, my dad would have never been home for this. My dad would be at work. That was his job. He was supposed to make money. My mother was always home. My dad was not present. So on some level, they're using their mental load to go like, I want to be a good dad because I want to be emotionally engaged. Am I being a good dad? Let me compare to my dad. Yes, I am. Or no, I'm not. Or I need to change in this way. The other way in which it drained their mental load or impacted how they did that emotional thinking work to metaparenting about whether they were a good dad is they would do things like, okay, I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good dad. I'm thinking about how I'm going to do it. I can't go based on default. I have to take a moment in between what I learned to do to be a good dad, how I was socialized into being a quote unquote father. And I have to take a pause. I have to take a beat. I have to slow down, and I have to decide whether I want to act that way or not. Let me give you an example. Imagine you are super angry or super emotional and your like rational brain turns off, right? You don't even know what's happening. You're going into a blind rage. Your brain is gone. And all of a sudden you act by default. And then you have this moment of reflexivity and we're like, whoa, what happened? Was I in a time zone? Did aliens take me? Because if I were in my rational brain, I wouldn't have acted that way. What these dads are saying is like, you're socialized by looking at your dad about how to be a good dad. And you can't actually just assume that you can run in default. You can't run in default because the way in which they showed up as dads isn't the way these dads want to show up. And so think about it as like cognitive drain on their mental load that they have to, every time, something happens, they have to go like, here's how I would by default socialization show up and act like a dad. But I have to take a step back, think about that, process it, think about how I'm going to interact in the world, and then make my own decision. That's the generative piece. And that's the piece where dads are doing extra thinking work because they can't just go, oh, I had a really good dad. I want to be that dad. I'll just do what my dad did for me. And then it's like streamlined and easy. Now, if your mother's listening, you might be doing the same work, right? But I want you to think about the fact that gender roles have switched so quick for dads that it's almost like they have to like catch up 4 levels in school. Like, and it's changing quickly and they don't necessarily have role models that they can rely on to show how to do it right. It's an additional drain and it's a difficult drain. Now, the interesting thing is when they started to compare themselves to the children's mothers, right? These were partnered heterosexual couples. They used a totally different gendered logic. They used a different mental load logic. So imagine you're going, okay, I'm comparing, I want to be a good dad. A good dad is engaged. A good dad is invested. I'm going to compare to my dad. I'm either not going to be like him or I'm going to be better than him. And then, oh man, I'm doing more for my kid. I'm engaged. I'm doing a pretty good job. When they go to the mothers, which we know from all the research and including all of these interviews, that on average, the mothers are doing more than the fathers. So the fathers are doing more than their fathers, but they're doing less than the mothers. When they go to the mothers, they use a totally different logic to explain why their contributions to the mental load is okay. And the mental load logics they're using comparing to the mothers is this idea of like, oh, she's just better at that. There's this kind of gendered essentialization about this, that like mothers hold innate and better skills in certain ways. And so of course they'll do different tasks because they are actually better at them in some innate way. This is exactly one of the main findings that Alison Damager has in her new book. And so it's always wonderful when your findings parallel to someone else's findings, because it means you got it right. Like there's consistency. This is what she's finding too, that usually there's an explanation within the family about why the mental load is split the way it is. And it's partially because there's this idea that mothers are inherently better at certain tasks than fathers. If you've listened to this long enough, you know that inherently better is often gender coded language for gender socialization. Like, yes, of course, people have inherently better skills, but not all women are inherently better at doing the dishes, holding the mental load, cleaning the sheets, remembering to trim children's fingernails. That's a socialization process. And so we often talk about, individual capabilities, but really some of that is true and some of that is socialization. So in this way, the dads are using different models, different kind of logics when they start to think about whether they're good parents compared to their partners who are women, to the mothers. And here's where you can see that gendered inequality can be baked back in. Now, what I mean by that is like, if you're a father and you're looking to your father, you're feeling pretty good about it. I'm doing a pretty good job because I'm doing better than him. Then when you turn to the mother, you're like, oh, but I'm doing less than her. But of course, because she's better at the work. That's where you're going to see the gender inequality that remains, right? It's not looking at her and saying, oh, I'm doing less than her because of gender socialization, or she got allocated this because we socialize mothers to think they're better at this, but is she actually better than this? Wait, maybe she actually sucks at remembering, to keep track of the children's schedule. Maybe she actually sucks at the holiday magic making. Oh man, maybe she just got that because she's a woman. Wait, maybe I could take more of that. That's a different logic. What we're showing is that they're going in like, oh, she has inherently better skills and she's better at that. So if I take a pause now, right, and step outside of the research of what we found in this article, what I want to say to you is this is the way in which conflict is going to come up in the partnership. It's because think about like people have different glasses on and are seeing the world in a different way. People have different prescriptions. People are seeing colors differently. And the result of that is that when fathers make that comparison to their fathers, right? When current fathers compare up generationally, they're like, oh man, I'm doing a pretty good job. Why is she so mad at me? I'm doing more than my dad did. I'm showing up in a way that's different. I'm giving more. I'm doing more. What's the conflict in the partnership about? I am giving all I can give. And the mothers are like, thank you. We appreciate that, but I'm still doing more than you. And why is that happening? And that's where the conversation is getting derailed. I will give you in my book coming out a chapter all about how to kind of bridge that conversation. But I just want to foreshadow for you that in this research, right, like this is kind of what we're finding, that there's these different comparisons. Think about dads just kind of seeing the colors differently or looking at it from different perspectives. Now, if you're in a heterosexual partnership or you're partnered with a man, right? What does this look like for you? Do you see this? And if you are a man and you're thinking about this, are you like, yeah, this makes sense to me? We'd love to hear more about what you're thinking. I have my Professor Leah Rapanner socials. My Instagram's open. I'm also on LinkedIn. Give us some feedback on how this is hitting for you. And if you could please listen, like, and comment and rate. we keep staying in the charts. This is like the podcast that like who knew was going to have legs indefinitely. And that's all thanks to you. So the more engagement that you give, even if it's just like a little download and a like and a review, we'd be so grateful, because it actually is pretty important for me on the back end to try to justify back to my university why this is an incredible investment, besides the fact that we get to be here together and love each other and share research. So any little activity on your end has a big impact on my end. So if you have time, energy, I would love you for it. As per always, thank you for listening to MissPerceived, where you don't have to have a PhD, you just get to hang out with me, and you get to learn more about the mental load from the expert in the field, me. Have a wonderful week. I love you, and give a dad a hug. He deserves it. He's trying hard. It's all new. The world has changed. We need to acknowledge that and share the love. We are so lucky and grateful that this series is being supported by the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative at the University of Melbourne. Mwah!